Alright. You both recording?
Yes.
Palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. You might recognize these words. They're the words of Eminem's character in the 2002 movie 8 Mile, but they also describe some of the physical symptoms of anxiety. I've spent a lot of time researching this topic, but I've also done a lot of lived research on this topic, having dealt with anxiety in various forms throughout my life. How many of you suffer from anxiety? I think we all do from time to time. Shyness, nervousness, butterflies. There's a lot of words to describe the emotion of anxiety, but as far as the disorder of anxiety goes, a lot of people suffer from it. You might even know someone who does. Well, I'm here to tell you that anxiety is complex, but it can be treated. Today we're going to touch on the definition of anxiety, the history of anxiety, the prevalence of anxiety, and finally the treatment of anxiety. So let's start by defining anxiety. How would you define anxiety?
Having a physical response to your emotions.
Well, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which I accessed on September 20th, 2020, says it's an apprehensive uneasiness or nervousness, usually over an impending or anticipated ill, a state of being anxious. So that's the emotion of anxiety, and I think we can all relate to that. We've all felt that from time to time. But there's a disorder called anxiety, which is when you have that emotion too much and disproportionately. You have it a lot, not when it's not necessarily appropriate to have it, and it really ruins your life. As the Merriam-Webster Dictionary says, it's an abnormal, overwhelming sense of apprehension and fear, often marked by physical signs, tension, sweating, increased heart rate, and doubt concerning the reality and nature of the threat, and self-doubt about one's capacity to cope with it. It's something that pervades every aspect of your life and perturbs your ordinary ability to function and have a happy life. There are many different kinds, but they share that. So now that we've looked at what anxiety is, let's join me in my rhetorical time machine as we go back in time and examine history of anxiety. On September 17th, 2015, my man Marc-Antoine Kroc, who's a psychiatrist, had written a paper where he talks about the history of anxiety. He starts off with Hippocrates, who described a man named Nicanor, who was scared of flutes, but only at night. And this is the first known recording of a phobia, which is a type of anxiety, and Hippocrates deals with it as a medical issue, which is very unique for the time. It's the first time that anxiety or something like that is looked at as a medical condition. Then a man named Cicero, who lived from 106 BC to 43 BC, writes a book called the Tusculan Disputations, where he talks about affliction, anxiety, and worry, and what those three things mean independently of each other. And then he talks about how anxiety and depression and sadness are different things. He also talks about how some anxiety is permanent, like some people are just anxious all the time, and then there's other anxiety which is just situational. He recommends the philosophy of Stoicism as a solution. Now, there's some other Greek and Roman fellows like Seneca and Epicurus who have similar things to say, basically saying that living in the moment or practicing philosophies like that are a good way to deal with things like anxiety. Now, by the 18th century, panic attacks have started to be described. By 1612, so that there's several centuries there where anxiety is just not mentioned at all. And then we get to 1612, Robert Burton again differentiates between anxiety and depression, and for the first time talks about social anxiety. Now, you may remember our friend Cicero. Well, he talks about a time that Cicero trembled before a speech. Now, that sounds pretty familiar to me. And now, by the time we get to the 18th century, as I said, panic attacks begin to be described. And then in the 19th and 20th century, many more disorders are defined for the first time. Emil Kraepelin and Sigmund Freud, two towering figures in the field of psychology, begin to describe anxiety. And finally, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, otherwise known as the DSM, which is a book that helps psychiatrists and psychologists to make diagnoses, is released. The first edition comes out in 1952. And it has anxiety as a category. Then, as we come out with each more edition, the definition of it becomes more and more refined. By the third, it's its own disorder, and it has its subtypes, which include phobias, panic disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and general anxiety disorder. And finally, by the 5th edition, which is the most recent edition, we have 3 categories of anxiety disorders: standard, OCD, and trauma-related. And we've talked a lot more about the neurology of it these days. So now we've covered the history of anxiety. Let's talk about the different types and who's affected. According to the Anxiety and Depression Foundation of America, which is a reputable nonprofit, which I accessed on September 20th, 2020, over 40 million adults suffer from anxiety disorders. That is 18.1% of the population. That's a pretty staggering number. That's almost 1 in 5. Additionally, 7 million adults suffer with general anxiety, 6 million have panic attacks, 15 million have suffered from social anxiety, and 19 million have phobias, 2 million have OCD, and 8 million have PTSD. Now, these are a lot of numbers, and I understand it's hard to process, but it's a lot of people. Additionally, general anxiety disorder, panic disorder, PTSD, and phobias are twice as common in women. But social anxiety disorder and OCD occur at equal rates in both men and women. Another thing to know is that a lot of people with anxiety also suffer from depression. Now, another statistic is that 25% of children between the ages of 13 and 18 suffer from some type of anxiety. So, all in all, this is a fair amount of the population, almost 20%. But yet, with all these people that have anxiety, only 36.9% get treatment. So, that's something to keep in mind. Now that we know the history and who it affects, let's talk about the ways it can be treated. I found another very reputable nonprofit called Anxiety.org, and they have an article called Anxiety Treatments, Know Your Options. I accessed this article on September 20th, 2020. They talk firstly about therapy. There are many forms of therapy that have shown some efficacy in anxiety. The number one is cognitive behavioral therapy, which deals with thoughts and behaviors and how they can be changed to help a client deal with their anxiety. There's another form of cognitive behavioral therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy, which is similar, but it deals with the philosophical paradox of how you can have acceptance and change at the same time. And it helps a patient to achieve that, to manage their life as best possible. Then we have exposure therapy, which is where small doses of something that causes fear the patient is exposed to them in greater and greater quantities to hopefully show them that things do get better, or that they can kind of become more used to it. Then we have group therapy, which is kind of exactly how it sounds. Patients sit in a group with one counselor, and that another thing that has shown success is hypnosis, which sounds like a guy is brainwashing you or whatever with like a clock that he's swinging back and forth, but it actually has some evidence behind it and can help with subconscious fears, which could lead to anxiety. Also, therapy is the least invasive, but it might not work for everyone, which is why medications are also available. SSRI antidepressants are a good option for a lot of people. They do have some side effects, and they don't work for everyone. Benzodiazepines are very effective for anxiety, but they carry the risk of addiction, and there's more and more research coming out showing that they can cause cognitive decline and sort of brain damage and dementia the longer you're on them. And so other things have been searched for. Blood pressure medications that control the physical symptoms of anxiety have shown some success, and lately they've been trialing the anesthetic ketamine for both depression and anxiety, and they found a lot of success and hopeful results with that. And they're always searching for new things, and it's just, we're at the beginning of an era where we're just probably going to be able to find more and more effective medications. Now, there's also other cutting-edge things such as brain stimulation, which sounds like something out of science fiction, but they found that if you apply electrical current to a specific part of the brain, you can achieve relief from certain symptoms of mental health disorders. Additionally, meditation is becoming more and more scientifically verified as being helpful. Mindfulness meditation in particular, so something that's been done for thousands of years is finally gaining science to back it up. Exercise can be helpful. Diet can be helpful, just changing diet. And then supplements can also be helpful, certain supplements. So we've covered a lot of information today. We learned about what anxiety is, the history of anxiety, who suffers from anxiety, and how anxiety can be treated. Now, that's the note I want to end on. the treatment of anxiety, because as I said, a lot of people suffer from it and not many of them get treatment. So the note I want to end on is that it is possible to get treatment for anxiety. There's a lot of treatments out there. I could barely scratch the surface on them, and they're discovering new treatments every day. There's a lot of research. So if you or someone you know suffers from anxiety, just know that it's okay to ask for help and that treatments are available.